Hi, Kristin.
Hi, Tricia.
I loved seeing this exhibit, and so I hope lots of people are taking advantage of seeing it. But there may be people who don't even know who Ansel Adams is, and I know you're just a wealth of information. So why don't you start by telling us about Ansel Adams?
Great. I'm going to try to get an image of him up here.
Okay.
This is a self-portrait that he did in Monument Valley. Kind of fun because it's a shadow, really,
Yeah.
not seeing his face. He is probably America's most popular photographer, and he certainly did a lot to bring photography to museums as a fine art. He was very open in sharing his knowledge with others through classes, through publications, so he's done a lot that way. His textbooks continue to be used even in the age of digital photography. His photographs, his writings, his lobbying before Congress were instrumental in Kings Canyon becoming a national park too. But he was born in 1902. In San Francisco, an only child to Charles and Olive Adams. His father was in the lumber business. Family had been for some time. His father was an amateur astronomer. I wouldn't say his parents were free thinkers, but they really encouraged their son to find his own path and to do things his way. They very much believed in nature and the positive relationship, an interrelationship between people and nature. And their house was actually outside San Francisco proper, up on a hill, sort of overlooking the city and overlooking the bay, and a great place for Ansel as a young boy to roam around and start to grow to love nature. He quit school. He was taken out of school after the 8th grade. School just didn't work for him. He was too hyperactive. Tutors, changing schools, just didn't work. And the year after he finished 8th grade was the year that the Pacific Panama World's Fair opened in San Francisco, 1915. And so his father bought him a year pass and let him go every day. And he looked at all of the displays, he talked to all of the exhibitors, and it really was a wonderful self-education. He also learned to play the piano that year. His mother had had a piano all along, but that's the year he got interested in it. And he was able to settle down and be disciplined with the piano. And
Which
that
sounds like that was the first
time ever, the first thing that really captivated him that way. And I think there was a lot to explore. The idea of improving himself at it, and he really ended up thinking by his late teens that he would be a professional musician, and he could have been. He had the skill. But the next year, he discovered photography. 1915, he got sick with the Spanish flu. He did recover. Oh, I'm jumping ahead of myself. I'm sorry. Actually, in 1915, he was ill, and he read a book that we have on display at the museum because there's a lot of family mementos, a lot of things that belong to him personally, including all these photos.
We're not just going to look at photography then, we're going to get a sense of him as a person.
As a person,
his actual belongings.
Right, and sort of his relationship with his family, his relationship with his friends, the things that mattered to him, the books that were critical to his thinking. And this book he read about Yosemite in 1915 encouraged him to ask his father that they go to Yosemite the following year for their first family vacation. It was a 2-day arduous journey there by train, very hot and dusty, and then by wagon, bumpy roads, not what we have today, of course.
Right.
And they got there, and his father gave him his first camera, and it was a Kodak #1 Brownie box camera. And he fell in love with photography as he fell in love with the mountains, and he met people in Yosemite who knew it well, took him out of the valley into the high country, exploring areas that he would return to. He basically hiked every peak in the Yosemite National Park and the surrounding area during the course of his life. And every year from then on, he spent at least the summer, if not more of the year, in Yosemite, and he raised his family there eventually. It wasn't until 1930 that he decided to become a professional photographer, to give up the music. But meanwhile, music had led him to meet his wife, Virginia Best. Her father owned a store in Yosemite Valley, Best Studio, which sold photographs of the valley to the tourists and also sold souvenirs.
Okay.
And I don't know, I mean, let's think back to 1916. How many people do we think would have been in Yosemite that summer? A couple hundred?
Maybe.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
not a
Well,
lot.
apparently when the family arrived there were 1,000 other visitors there. So it had already become relatively popular. And Ansel recognized early on, as much as he wanted to share his love of Yosemite, and he does through his photographs, he also was concerned that it not be overrun and ruined by so many visitors. I have one of my favorite photos, shall I say. It's Half Dome and the Merced River in Yosemite Valley. So Half Dome is rising 5,000 feet up above the valley floor here. It's the altitude at the top is about 8,800 feet above sea level. The Merced River runs through the valley. It's part of what carved the valley out. Wintertime is perhaps not when most people think of going there, but it can make it very, very beautiful. And Half Dome is one of perhaps the most often photographed aspects. Yosemite Falls, of course, upper and lower as well. This is a photograph that Ansel took in 1938, and I don't know, in his photographs, he's wanting us to understand his emotional response to what he saw. But I hope that viewers to the exhibit, and I think even looking at this reproduction on the screen, we can see his skill. I mean, the clarity of the image, not just what's near us being in sharp focus, but what's at a distance. He favored black and white always, although he did do color work commercially. But for me, the black and white lets us see each individual bit more clearly. And we're seeing the gradations from white to dark. Yes. He developed a zone system, which we don't need to talk about here, but he was thinking about having the 10 different gradations and how that helps us see an image more clearly. I don't know, you can see how cold and bright it is. Light was very important to him, but not just light because it was illuminating something, but the quality of the light. A lot of people ask, well, what would he think of digital photography? Ansel would love digital photography. He was doing in the darkroom what we would do now in Photoshop and other programs.
Right.
Making some decisions about emphasizing one area, de-emphasizing another area. And he did that in the darkroom. But he also knew before he even took the photograph, something he called visualization. He looked at something and he knew how, as he was deciding what aperture, what lens to use, what filter, he was because those could help emphasize certain things. He was also deciding at that point, how am I going to develop it? How am I going to print it? What is the finished product going to look like? That didn't just happen. That came from years and years of study.
Practice and experiment.
Right, which he did. And the results are fantastic. This one really does show you, too, the darks and the lights. Now, this is a photograph from 1944, and it's a sunrise. Ansel was smart enough, he understood his craft well enough that he was ready for the unexpected moment to capture an image. And if you come to the exhibit, you can see some examples of that. But there were also times when he knew what he wanted, and he had to wait on Mother Nature to cooperate.
To give him the exact moment.
Right. Sometimes he wanted a sunrise and the sun didn't rise that day because there were so many clouds. And so you have to go back or you have to wait in one way or another. And this one, he knew what he wanted. He's a great distance, as you can see, from the lower mountains and then, of course, the further mountain range beyond. Yes. And he knew he wanted to get at a moment when the one's in darkness and the sun is just catching the snow and turning that white. But he arrives this morning and there's a horse. Do you see the horse in the distance there?
Yes, I do.
Sort of a little bit right of center in the pasture area there. He wasn't expecting the horse, but that was lovely, except that the horse was facing completely away from him. And he kept hoping that maybe the horse would turn and so you wouldn't get its rear end, but maybe you could see its front or maybe profile or whatever. Yeah. But the sun is coming, the sun is coming, the sun is coming. He's going to lose this moment. And just at the last second, the horse does turn just very casually. So he captures that perfect
Perfect
image. A lot of landscape in this exhibit, and that's what one expects if one has heard of Ansel Adams. But there are also a lot of other images in the show that might not be what one first expects. And there's a lot of farm scenes. There were a lot of portraiture as well. And
I don't think that's something that people really think of Ansel Adams. They think of wilderness and mountain
exactly.
photography.
And that's what he used, as I said, to help with. He was very, very involved with the Sierra Club, so he published a lot of things in their newsletters. That kind of got him started in publishing. He wrote books. There's just all sorts of things. But he did a lot of farm in California. Farming was so important in Central California. It's important today still. And he actually did some farms and other architectural series, not just in the Southwest, but in the Northeast as well. He did come to Illinois. We don't think he did any photography in Illinois.
Yeah.
I know, that would be kind of fun. But again, and when you come see, now this is one of the large format photos. They call them mural size, so it's way beyond what would fit over the sofa, shall we say.
Oh, all right.
But very large scale. But you really get the sense with the fence. Everything is just in such amazing focus that you could run your finger over the photograph and get a splinter coming out of the fence as well. So really quite wonderful. There are 144 photographs by Ansel in the exhibition, plus another about 36 of him and family members. So I think it's not just black and white photography, it's really a vision of celebrating our country, and it's certainly a celebration of this man's vision. And I think any of us who look at the exhibit will come away with another way to look at a photograph.
Right. Well, I don't know if you know this. I may be asking just, out of turn here. But at what point was he the turning point for when photography went from just being a way to record an image to becoming fine art?
He was part of that. And when he started doing photography in the 20s, really, because professional photographers knew that it didn't have to just record a moment in time, that it could make the same kind of statement that a painting could. They were trying to figure out how do we compete with paintings in essence. And so pictorialism was popular. They were basically coming off of Impressionism, and if they kind of fuzzy up a little bit, it will look impressionistic, and that will be artful. And he tried that a little bit, but then decided he didn't care for it. It wasn't honest.
Didn't work for him.
Right, and honesty was so important to him in every aspect of his life. So that's when he started the f/64 group, and of course f/64 is the smallest aperture on your camera lens, and that is where you have the most detail in your focus. And he was among other artists, Paul Strand, Edward Weston, Dorothy Lang, who were all working at this time. Ansel was instrumental. He was lucky enough to befriend the Newhalls, Nancy and, I'm sorry, I just forgot her husband's name, the Newhalls, who were curators at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And they and their director were interested in bringing photography to museums. So they worked with him. He helped with writings and lectures and stuff like that to help people recognize that it's a skill. It's not just point and click.
No.
To have your composition, to have it be meaningful, and that kind of thing. And then his museum set, Ansel did decide late in his life, he's in his 60s when he decided to, again, help museums, which still, in the 1960s, museums still were slow to be adding photography to their collection. We don't have very many photographs in our collection at Peoria Riverfront Museum either. But he went through his whole career and selected a group of works that he felt best represented his work, his entire career, and printed them as a group for museums to buy and have. And that's what we showed in 2006. We showed the museum set that he printed for his daughter. Okay. And we actually now control that and circulate it to other museums to show.
Wonderful.
So, which is very, very exciting to do. So yes, Ansel was definitely a part of that, and through his teaching as well. And you can still go out to Yosemite, and I mentioned his wife's father's business, Best Studio.
Yeah.
Well, when Mr. Best died, Virginia took over that business, and the whole family then has continued to own it, and it's now the Ansel Adams Studio in Yosemite, and that's where you buy, in the valley, that's where you buy your authorized prints, catalogs, note cards, postcards, and other wonderful, wonderful items. And you can still take classes. Of course, Ansel is gone. He died in 1984. But they do, on a regular basis each week, during the summer especially, photography walks through the valley. And my family did one back in the 70s, and it was wonderful. Not from Ansel, although he was still living. And then they do, at certain times, bring in either Alan Ross, who is the only authorized photographer to work with Ansel's negatives, or some of the other photographers who had worked with him to do more specialized workshops on black and white photography.
Okay.
And they're wonderful experiences. The exhibit is up through September 22nd.
Okay, so we still have a little bit
You've got,
to see
yes.
it.
September 22nd, and we're open through the summer. We're open 7 days a week. So any day you want to come. We're open late till 8 o'clock on Fridays, otherwise we close at 5.
Okay.
And then the last weekend of August, Ansel's son Michael will be returning. He was here in April when we opened the exhibit and gave a special talk about his father's work. And he did help his father at times, went on some of the trips to photograph. He did a wonderful presentation in our giant screen theater. So you're seeing these reproduced 70 feet wide, 52 feet high. It was so popular, we sold out, and so we're bringing Michael back.
Oh, wonderful.
If you're interested in coming, though, call the museum right away at 686-7000 for August, the last Sunday in August of this year, 2013.
Okay, to be able to see that presentation.
Right, yeah. There's a charge, but there's a reception as well, so a chance to visit with Michael and 200 other people.
Yeah, 200 people. Yeah. Well, and of course, anybody who wants to use the library resources, we have resources that you can see.
You do.
And learn about him, learn about photography. So often people have an interest in photography, and maybe they've just been doing their point and shoot, and all of a sudden they're ready for something bigger, or they've been struggling, trying to do better photographs. And the library can be a great resource.
Absolutely. You've got
to
one
augment, there's nothing like hands-on, but there's, it's also wonderful to do your own reading and your own experimenting. And obviously Ansel Adams didn't get to be who he was by just following what everybody else said.
And he learned a lot when he was first starting out. He got a job in San Francisco with a photographer developing the prints and printing them for him. So that's when he had an opportunity to really start learning how, what did the professionals do. Built a home studio, darkroom. And yes, he did experiment, which is typical, especially back in the darkroom days, but it's just a different process now on your computer of the same type of experimenting. If I do this, what effect do I end up with? But he did the test strips so that he could see if I leave it in the developer longer, what happens. If I block this out and make this darker, what happens. Right. Just a lot of
I'm not sure how many people, I had a dark room at one point, so if you've not had that experience, just saying that word, I can smell the chemicals. If folks who are younger have not had that opportunity and understand that whole process is probably, still worth keeping, and there's things you can probably do with the darkroom that you still can't do digitally. But on the other hand, everybody's got their smartphone and has the app that you can do filters and all sorts of things with. But I don't know if it turns out the same if you're Ansel Adams and you're on top of a mountain with a filter, as opposed to you've got your iPhone and you call
it's not going to be quite the same.
Instagram and put a filter.
Well, and
it's
then
be the same.
One thing we didn't even talk about. So many of these. I mean, think back to that first image I showed. Throughout much of his career, he did most of his photography in the 30s and 40s into the 50s. Later than that, he was doing more teaching and writing. It's not as much photography, but did some.
He wasn't probably hiking around with
he continued to hike, but that's the point. In those early years, he was hiking in tennis shoes or leather boots, didn't have the kind of equipment we have now, carrying a heavy tripod and a large view camera and a dozen or more glass plate negatives. So it was hard work, and there's a publication of his letters, and he talks about once time hiking up a mountain and then realizing he didn't have any glass plate negatives with him. Oh well, he had a good hike anyway, or just the weight of it. So it was hard work. If he was going for long distance into the high country, and he sometimes did, whether by himself, whether with a few friends, or whether with 200 members of the Sierra Club, which they would do for a month-long camping every summer, they would have burros to do the heavy carrying. So a combination of that, the family still hires a burro if they're doing a long hike into the backcountry. The family says they know places that the park rangers don't know about still, even today. So,
do you know how big Yosemite is?
Not off the top of my head. I'm sorry, I don't.
We can find that out at the library too.
Right, and it's part of the Sierra Nevada mountain range, which is about 400 miles north and south and about 70 miles wide. Yosemite National Park is a part of that, and then the valley itself is easy to hike in a day. The mountain roads around there are kind of slow, the twisty and steep, so it can take an hour to go from Wawona on the south side of Yosemite down into the valley, especially on the summertime when there's a lot of traffic, or if there's weather going on or that sort of thing. So I hope people will visit Yosemite too. And the exhibit covers a much broader range. It's Western Exposure is the name of the exhibit. So we have a lot of California, we have the Southwest, we have Alaska in it as well. Yosemite does happen to be one of my favorite places, and I've had the privilege to go there 7 times and visit, most recently with Ansel's daughter, to see it through her eyes. That was very, very special.
I bet. Did you hike?
We didn't. We did a light hike. No burros, no heavy camera equipment.
You weren't carrying it.
No.
Weren't carrying glass
But
plates.
we did a little bit down in the valley, and then she did take us to an area up on the top near Glacier that I had not been to before, and so that was really special to see another place too. But anyway.
And at what point do you think in his career that people started to take notice and he started to be famous and well known, and this is a person worth noting?
Right. I think that all of his articles in the Sierra Club in the 20s really helped. I think people were starting to a degree. I mean, that was the start of it, and he was really lucky with that. I know by the time of World War II. That he was well known out there in Yosemite, and of course that was his photographs that you mostly were seeing. My parents had the opportunity to buy photographs then, and it would have been perhaps for $10 a photograph, and they were interested but just didn't choose to do that. They couldn't foresee how famous and how important he would become, how essential and critical to the American view of the West. Certainly by the 50s, the prices are starting to go up on the market. So I would say it's mid-century. He was in the 40s, late 30s. He was starting to get a lot of commissions, both from the government, but also from private industries. And he was, as I mentioned, he was doing his color work for commercial purposes.
Do you have any color pieces of things?
We do, actually. None of them are from the commercial work, but they are things that he did do in color. And so they are landscape. And it is good to see. And we have one comparison where we have the same view in color and in black and white. And it's a really good example. I was with one of our patrons yesterday, and we were comparing them to see how much clearer everything is in black and white. Yes, it's more distinct to separate the images out visually.
And that's probably because you can get the different detail when you're only working. The
tone, somehow the seeing the different grays versus the white and black, it's easier for me to distinguish separate elements than to see the oranges and the browns, and they were blending together, and the greens, they were blending together more. Right.
Now, are there any portraits of people he did that are well known?
Oh, well, there are other photographers, other famous photographers, people, and then other artists like Georgia O'Keeffe, and these are all people that he knew. I mean, this was his social circle, which I think must have been just so exciting to grow up. These are Daddy's friends.
Oh, yeah.
How cool is that? Coming to spend the night at your house and sit around with dinner conversation. There are famous writers. There actually are in the exhibit are a portrait of Jimmy Carter, who bestowed the Presidential Medal of Honor on Ansel, our highest award. And then a photograph of him, he didn't take this one, a photograph of him with, I guess it is a photograph he took of Lyndon Johnson, President Johnson, when he was president. A cartoon that Gary Trudeau made of Ansel standing as if he's standing looking over Yosemite Valley. So yeah.
So a lot of variety of things.
There are.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, and so the exhibit runs through
September 22nd.
All right. Well, thank you for coming.
Thank
and
you.
I hope everybody takes advantage of this opportunity.